SailGP is starting in about a week's time, and I'm really interested to see how the season pans out. But off the back of the AC, where I've been talking America's Cup boats and the technical differences between them and what makes them tick, I'm kind of looking to the F50s and thinking, what are the differentiators there? And who better to talk to than GBR team skipper from the previous season, Dylan Fletcher. So Dylan's taking a bit of time out from his Olympic campaign to guide us through the technicalities of these F50s, so we can kind of watch in a bit more of an informed way for the next season. So welcome to the channel, Dylan. I'm doing this purely selfishly. I'll put it up on YouTube for other people to watch as well, but it's really you just telling me what to look out for on the F50s. But I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is how much can you appreciate these sailing competitions, the America's Cup as well? Can you watch as a fan, or you kind of always got a work hat on, or do you try and zone out from it completely?
Oh yeah, a massive fan of any sort of that side of the sport, and we were all tuning in. We were in Lanzarote. We weren't waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but we had watch parties, 8 o'clock, that was it, first race, every single day it was on. And massive fan of it. It was great to see.
And what about the SailGP this season? Obviously, you've been on the boat before and now you're not. Will it be hard to watch not being involved?
There's quite a lot of FOMO not being involved, but, for sure we'll be watching it, and, can't wait to see 8 boats rather than 6 lining up. And they've got some incredible venues. Bermuda to start with. We all love watching the Cup there. So to see 8 boats going around, I think some slightly, higher level across the board, I think it's going to be really exciting to watch.
Well, their loss is our gain, because it frees you up to talk a little bit more freely on the boats and the kind of technicalities and the game features. Before we get onto that, I think there was one, I'm always interested just to see what pro sailors feel about the different competitions. Obviously, we've got the America's Cup, which has existed forever, essentially, as a kind of development match race. We've then had these kind of premier Grand Prix circuits, like the Extreme Sailing Series, probably the precursor, and now SailGP, which has fallen out of the previous Cup cycle. How do you view the competitions? Where do you, as a pro sailor, put them in a hierarchy? What do you prefer as a format?
I think it's quite hard to put it in an exact hierarchy. Of course, the America's Cup is steeped in rich history, and I think every sailor wants to compete in that at some point in your life, and you'd love to win it for your own country. The SailGP is quite different. It's a much smaller team, and for me it's more based around sort of sailing team. They're one design, and as much as the America's Cup's incredible, it's always won by the fastest boats, and the sailors do make the difference by being able to provide the feedback and sail the boat on the limit during the training. But ultimately, if you don't have a design team that does a very good job, you can't make a lemon go that fast. So the SailGP, I think what all of us are attracted to is just that fact that it is one design. And yeah, there are some subtle differences, but it's more one design than any other one design that I know. The fact that you get all these great names lining up against each other on some tight race courses is just incredible.
Yeah, I think often the question we're left over after an America's Cup is, who would have won if they were in the same boat? And for once, never happens, but for once, we're probably going to get to see that roll out in this SailGP season, which will be hugely interesting. So the reason I've got you on the channel is obviously I like picking apart boat races. Did it with the America's Cup, kind of looking for some subtle differences of how the boats performed. And with SailGP coming up, I thought you'd be the best person to ask to kind of understand, what does a well-sailed F50 look like? We're not going to get the differences. You already said it's one design. We're not going to get the differences in design that I can pick apart, but I'd like you to give me some tips so I can get into the action and really pick apart the boats as they're being sailed.
The main thing really is they look settled and stable, and roughly speaking, if you're, traveling along with 10 knots of wind and the wind doesn't change at all, that you're going at 25 knots that wind, and you don't steer and you don't move the wing and you don't move anything, no one has to move. And every time you steer, someone else is going to have to do something. And so it's really obvious, I think, from the outside when you look at the videos, the people that are struggling, the newer teams or less experienced, they're going up and down more. They maybe get a bit high and then slide, sideways with the leeway.
Yeah.
And the way the foils are on the F50, for example, compared to the Cup, actually sort of make it, there's a much smaller groove of the ride height that you can sail the boat on. It's like anything, you fly it a bit higher, it's faster, but then all of a sudden too high and you're just sideways. And when that happens, then the wing trimmer has to wind the wing on because you lose all the heeling force. There's no heeling force now. So the boat comes to windward, and then all of a sudden the foil goes down, grips, and then you just trim the wing on. So then now you heel over. So I think that's the main thing. If you see anyone locked in, then they're looking good. And then if you really want the last subtleties of difference, it's about how close to the water the crew can fly the windward hull. But again, a subtle change from the America's Cup, where the AC50s, is that the foils stick out further down due to the shape of them to allow them to do the higher speeds. It's a bit harder to get the boat as close.
Getting into some more details, there was a lot of play in the kind of press leading up to the inaugural season about the data sharing and teams being able to learn from each other. How much of that was kind of lip service for the press? How much of it was truth and you could actually learn and delve into the data of the other teams? Was that a valuable resource?
Yeah, it was definitely valuable. I mean, a good example was the first day of racing we did in Sydney. When we analysed it at the end of the day, we couldn't work out why the Aussies were able to foil jibe that day so much better than everyone else. When we looked at the data, it was because they had changed the mode on the board drop and were sailing the boat differently, and the rest of us were using all of the oil up, basically. So for the second day, we managed to change our settings, and we're trying to be a bit more cautious with the amount of oil we were using, basically. And another example is the wing data. So we can see basically how people are setting their twist profiles up. You don't need to take rig shots because we've got the data from it. So we can go, Japanese are setting up, particularly straight beached or twisty, or they're, the different parts of the wing of different names, and you can control them. And I think even more so now with the new one design wings. So I think the data is going to become more valuable now. There's the opportunity is so much more to change the wing shape.
Oh, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's something that just pinged off in my head. I think there was a lot of talk post the America's Cup in San Francisco about inverting the top of the rig to provide righting moment. Obviously, similar sort of wing technology came through to Bermuda and then onto F50s. Is that actually a thing? There's lots of rumours going around about actually forcing in negative camber to give you more righting moment and suddenly hitting another gear. Is that something that happened, or is it more just like regular twist?
So it wasn't something. So my understanding was that it was something that was tried for the AC50, but it was actually a net loss. The drag basically didn't outweigh the amount of righting moment gain. And the other problem is that you were, by trying to create, by putting negative twist into it, you're also then causing, more tip loss and more drag coming from the top of the mast or top of the wing. Yeah. So the top of the wing is really just there to, when you're overpowered, to feather into effectively apparent wind angle at 0, so that you end plate the rest of the wing underneath that. But that's, I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Oh, well, we'll keep an eye on it, but I'm sure it's a rumour which is going to keep on going. I think, so you said about the new wings being one design. I I spoke to a few of the lads involved with the SailGP, and I know the first season there was some of the boats are kind of repurposed from the previous America's Cup and rebranded and rebadged, and I think some of the technology was maybe subtly different in the boats. Can you give us any insights about how that was, at least for the season that you did?
We were supposed to have the BAR boat, but we ended up having a new one. We sailed the British boat, the American boat, and the Australian boat at various points over the season. And the boats are all identical, apart from the colours. And some people put labels in a few places, but they are, for all intents and purposes, all the boats are identical. And the wings were either sort of Artemis or Oracle wings, effectively, or team to Japan. And we tried a few of the different wings, and they were fairly similar. They all had their sort of subtle differences, but it didn't seem to, necessarily have an impact on around the race course. One might have been slightly better at something, but then it would have had a slight negative. But the actual sort of in a straight line flying shape, they limited us. So, if one wing could do something, they put a software limiter so that it couldn't do that anymore. So they were similar.
Did you get a feeling from racing on the circuit that there were speed differences between the boats and how people were moding it? Do you ever think, they race quick, and how much of that was set up and how much of it was kind of like helm, like feel / trimmer, flight controller feel?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what it came down to, but I've got a good idea. So there were certainly some trends, and I think probably most noticeable was our high mode. The British, we had quite a good high mode upwind, and put it the polar opposite was the Australians, who had a pretty good low mode upwind. And I think one of the large reasons for that was down to weight. So although there's a maximum weight that we're allowed to sail at, and if you're under the weight, then there's like a ballast system, so that roughly speaking it's relatively even. But where the ballast gets put on the boat means there is a very, very small difference in terms of where you have your weight. So you've got 5 crew members, and if you, for example, had a skipper who weighed 100 kilos and your grinders only weighed 70 kilos, obviously that moves the weight up in the boat.
Yeah.
And so as a British boat, Chris, Draper and myself were relatively light, probably around 140, 145 kilos between the two of us. And then you've got, for example, Tom Slingsby and Carl Langford, who are probably nearer 200 to 190 to 200 kilos between them. And what that means is that on the F50, we've got differential between, the two rudders to pull down, which is developed up to about 1 ton of righting moment, that rudder. And it's 7.1 degrees difference, 7.1. And all the boats are the same, and they worked really hard to make sure that was the case. But you only have I think it was 2.5 or 2.6 and 2.8 degrees of rudder average. So the average between the two, where you got your 7 degrees of differential.
Yeah.
So what that meant is that everyone sailed around that wind with the maximum diff you could. Yeah. You always sailed that wind with the maximum rudder lift you could, and to get your differential.
Yeah.
And the reason we did that is because that would obviously get our rudder struts out of the water, our rudder verticals, and provide us with the most amount of righting moment. So because the Aussies had 50 kilos more weight in the back of their boat, they had more rudder immersed basically in the water. So to counteract that, they could sail a bit faster forwards, basically, to try and obviously help get rid of some of that rudder strut. I mean, it's pretty long-winded and quite detailed, but you also saw it with some of the speeds. So on the downwind and the reaching, you end up in a scenario where if you have heavy crew at the back of the boat, or you put a 6th man on board, for example, in training, you literally can keep the rudder in the water more. Because you can keep the rudder, you get more differential. Because as you go downwind, you have to run less rudder average because you're going faster. So yeah, one of the reasons why the Aussies are so quick downwind and reaching is because they've got some slightly heavier guys, and for example, myself and Chris at the back.
And imagine during the acceleration as well, it's probably a big thing because it's that back corner you really want to pin down and get the weight to, if you could. But you know when. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but then when you tack, you're in a scenario where in light wind, you would run more rudder lift on to try to accelerate out of the tack to get more rudder strut out. Okay. So it's almost a benefit in the light wind tacking to have less weight in the back of the boat. But then you're right, when it's windy, it's really good to have that weight in the back of the boat. And so there's swings and roundabouts, but I think that there might be a bunch of other stuff going on, but it is one of the small things that the differences there are in the boats.
Power demands on the boat, and how limited were you, like in manoeuvres? We talked a little about accumulators previously, but yeah, could you race them at will, do whatever you wanted whenever, or was there some limitations there?
There were some limitations in the first event in Sydney, but they changed them for San Francisco. So it was unbelievable. You know, anyone who sailed in the Cup, you know, to get in these boats, they were just tacking, jibing left, right, and centre. I think I heard when Ben got in the boat in Sydney last year and they were doing their first training session, they went around for 40 minutes without dropping off the foil, just because in the America's Cup world you're so used to breakdowns, you know, and they'll often have. They have to stop for whatever reason, so they just sail until the boat breaks, and they have a break when that's the case. Whereas, the 50s are just, I mean, I think we had one small issue in the whole year that we obviously didn't cause ourselves, which cost us 3 or 4 minutes sailing. And the rest of the time they were just uber reliable, and you could do as many tacks as you wanted until your grinders got upset.
Yeah. I mean, that's incredible from the shore crew's point of view for something that's still, you know, close to the cutting edge or at the cutting edge of technology. But I guess that's also the pro side of using one design parts, is that you can factor in a bit more reliability to the systems without having to be, you know, at that kind of bleeding edge on every front all at once. So coach's hat on, you're outside the boat now, you're looking at these teams. What are you looking for in terms of an AC75 in terms of heel, pitch, communications from a coach's perspective?
Yeah, I think that, you know, different teams will operate with their own little styles, you know, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of chat on some of the boats where they're talking between maybe the helm and the flight controller, maybe, or wing trim about tactics, and then you have other boats which be very quiet. But from sort of with the coach's hat on, I think the F50, a lot of the racing is around the manoeuvres, and if you can pull off good manoeuvres, it makes your life, you know, easy to be able to tack in the right place. So a lot of it is going to be interesting to see, you know, how that level progresses. You know, how late can you be or timing your board drop relative to people coming across. So if the people run across early, obviously the boat starts slowing down, and then the board drops once they're on the new side. You know, you're just losing speed. Whereas if they're running across as the board's dropping, if you can pull that off, that's going to be a better maneuver. And I think I saw a video of the Americans jibing the other day, and the two crew were on the new side, before the board had dropped. Now it's super early days, but I'm sure by the time we see them in race one, you know, they'll have barely got out of the cockpit and that board will be going down.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about, you know, a 50-foot boat which is so sensitive to crew movement as well. We've already gone into the details about the weight positioning for the actual speed and the rudder differential, but to hear it in manoeuvres as well, getting the weight on the new side quickly is really paying off. That's quite an interesting point. So I have to get my my eagle eyes out to look at the sequencing of the moving about the boat. Did you play around with that much then? Was that kind of like an area for concern?
And I think it was, you know, there was a bit of a strength of our boat having, you know, a lot of 49er sailors in there. but it was certainly something that I was working quite a lot on, and different to the other helms, I guess, having not been in that world and sailed them before. One goal of mine was to cross the boat early, so I'd often start the turn and then get out and run. So I'd be trying to cross the boat really, really early, like almost as the wind's going through. It'd be interesting to see if any other skippers do that, or if they'll do sort of like the AC 75 style, where you land on the new angle and then you cross the boat.
Yeah.
But for sure, you do notice a difference. When you've got those people down to leeward, it is noticeable.
The wings which were different. Can you tell us anything about what were different about the wings? Because that's quite interesting for Bermuda as well.
Yeah, well, what's different with the new wings going forward?
The old wings, but then we could talk about the new short rig.
Yeah. So previously it was just the design of the wings. So, they were from the AC50s, and there's, as an example, the Oracle had what was called a table in it, and this table would rock as you tapped, and there was components that slid up and down that controlled the twist. And I guess when they started, the cup, they said, as the cup progressed, even during the cup in Bermuda, they were just sailing flatter and flatter and flatter with more twist, as the boats were getting faster. And I guess there was just a leftover of that, in that there was just a physical limitation to the wing of how flat it could go with a certain amount of twist. And that's gone now.
Yeah.
Well, for Bermuda, they're all new wings, basically. So every team has, they've got a 29.5, a 24, and an 18-meter wing. And all it is bits that they, take in and out. Whereas in the first season, all they had was the 24, going one design. They've now gone for a hydraulic wing. And what that allows for this season is a lot more control. So as an example, in season 1, in 12, 13 knots of wind, we were going upwind with as flat and twisted as we could make the wing. So, we're on our max depower setting, 13 knots. And that was down to the way the wing functions. Whereas this time round, they'll be able to sail with more twist and a flatter wing. So I think as we go up the wind range, you should see some bigger speeds, especially on that 18-meter wing.
Do you reckon you could predict a top speed with the small rig on?
I don't honestly know. I mean, we've seen some VPP numbers, and it's talks about some mid-50s, but I think a lot of it is an unknown due to the cavitation.
Yeah.
And so what actually happened from the AC50s to the F50s is, although there's a lot more differential upwind, and at times when we actually got to the 50 knots or near 45 knots, there's actually less righting moment than the AC50. So the AC50 had a set amount of differential, which was, I think it was like 3 degrees or something. But by the time they had some clever rudders, some racking, and they did all sorts of things basically in order for them to get more. They had about 4 or 5 degrees. And
they were twisting the hulls quite a lot as well, weren't they, in Bermuda?
They stiffened up the bottom of the mast, the wing, and then they ran their lowers completely loose, which would rack the boat basically. And that all got all of the lowers and the shrouds and forestay tension. The forestay length was all one design, and it was checked every day. So the sort of net result was that the boats in Bermuda had more righting moment when they were traveling at 45 plus knots, or even 40 knots. So the F50 is one of the hardest things, is when you're fighting that righting moment when it gets up to that speed. And it is a safety thing, if you imagine you're developing one, maybe they allowed 1.5 tons of righting moment on that rudder, and that rudder comes out of the water, you're capsizing pretty fast. Whereas if it's doing less, it's slightly less of an issue. And then there's this cavitation, even so, I think the Aussies might have done 51 point something, but and and that was with 6 people on board in training. So they had another person to help get that rudder in water. But I can guarantee you that Tom Slingsby will be absolutely gunning for a top speed in 55 knots or whatever he can. But I think that the potential more impressive thing will be some of the upwind speeds, and downwind speeds just around the racecourse.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was a lot of speculation about the AC75s and how fast they were going to be, and in the end, like the top speeds weren't really that much quicker, considering we're 4 years on from Bermuda. But what was impressive about the AC75s was their like VMG upwind. The efficiency there was incredible. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what leap forward the F50s can make in that regard. What else? Oh yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to ask you about. There's new teams. So first of all, there's going to be a frightening amount of boats on the courses, which I'm kind of excited about, but I kind of feel nervous. Like, it was insane when the first season, when we went from watching it as just match racing boats, one against one, to then seeing them with, what was it, 6 boats on the start line your season. And now we've got more. How do you think that's going to play out?
I think it's going to be wicked. I think that there's no doubt that it was a bit hectic, and they talked, for example, in New Zealand, they were talking about how small the starting box was. That starting box was enormous compared to an F50 start box with 8 boats. To put it into perspective. So I think it's going to be really interesting to start seeing if people are trying to do timed runs and start flying around. And I think that we're going to have starts or reaches where there's 4 boats abreast, at the first reach mark, and they're all doing 40 knots. So, I mean, who doesn't want to see that? I mean, there is some more danger, and, I think that's a good reason why they're all tethered on as opposed to the AC75s. But, I think it's going to be brilliant, and we're going to see some really great racing with a lot more overtakes, I think.
Okay, and then the next point, obviously the big news has been the kind of movement of the AC sailors into F50. It's a great opportunity for kind of fans of the sport to see the AC helms in a one design class, but the big high profile kind of additions is obviously Jimmy Spittle's gone to Team USA, and then Pete and Blair have gone to the new New Zealand syndicate. So what do you make of their chances, and who do you expect to perform?
I think it's awesome. I think there's very likely to be, there's 5 boats off the bat who you could see in the match race in Bermuda, and I think that it's really difficult one to predict how teams are going to get on. I think that, Tom, and the Australian team they won in season 1, and they sort of really dominated that season. But then Nathan was always there or thereabouts. So they've got that sort of a bit more experience with the F50, but we saw how powerful it was when Ben came in with the exact team that he was sailing the AC75 with at the time. They've been doing loads of practice, loads of simulator time. When Tom hasn't sailed an F50 or the Australian team since Sydney, and they haven't sailed another high-performance foiling boat other than their single-handed Moths. So I think that anyone who's done the Cup's going to be hot on it, and it will be interesting to see how each of the teams gel. I think that the British team are going to be super hard to beat because they've got such a strong team that they've taken from the Cup,
Yeah, and is a little bit of you pleased to see Pete and Blair kind of distracted by a F50 campaign with Tokyo coming up?
I'm pretty easy about it. I'm probably a bit more jealous that we're not there doing it ourselves, but if we were doing it, I know it would be pretty full on, and our bosses would be very upset with us.
How did you feel about your season in SailGP? Because I think you were pretty solidly, the 3rd place team in the events you finished. Then you had New York, where you had the capsize and lost time there, and then obviously Cowes, where we had the kind of pitch pole, and that kind of lost you like two key events where really probably would have been a nailed on third otherwise.
I mean, we had an absolute epic time. I think that the San Fran was a big highlight for us. We just the second event, and we won a race, and we had the Aussies trying to match race us to get into the match race, and we were a bit green to that, and probably weren't expecting it as much as we should have been, and what have you. But I think we were we were so happy, with how it went, and we were a bit disappointed with the ultimate result. And we didn't finish a lot of races, and then even in Marseille, I got ill with a virus, and have never been so ill my whole life, and was sailing around on Red Bull and paracetamol trying to get me through. But ultimately, I guess it was a slight disappointment, because the whole goal of our team was a 3-year project. So we understood that in year one, it was impossible for us to be in the match race to win $1 million. We just wanted to be in a position that come season 2, we would be able to challenge for that. So hopefully one day we'll get an opportunity to get back on. But at the meantime, at least Ben's doing an incredibly good job with the British team.
There's always the question marks, is Ben too old for high performance boats? Is he getting too slow? And one of the elements that people point to is his performance, not only in the America's Cup World Series a few years ago, but is his result in Australia when he stepped into the F50, won that event, was fairly dominant in it. But the flip side of it was Ben was coming in with a very different situation to what you were racing the F50, in that he was stepping on, with Luke Parkinson, who was Artemis flight controller, top guy, Goobs as well, hugely experienced. So, and a lot of simulator time, and Ben had done a full campaign in AC50s. So, in some ways, his results in Australia wasn't that surprising. And if you compare it to what you and Stu were trying to do, obviously you had Chris with you, who's had the experience from the AC50s, but you and Stu were brand new.
Ultimately, it is sport, and Ben came along, and he, like you say, he's incredibly talented and good, and comes with sponsors, and it was exactly the right thing, he felt like, for the America's Cup campaign at the time. So can't take anything away from what he's done, and he obviously dominated, it was amazing to watch. But hopefully one day he'll let us have a go at some point.
Yeah, you never know, if they switch the nationality rules around a little bit more and get a little bit more lax on that, then there might be other teams with a few more openings. So, who knows? 2021 for you, huge year. Must have been super weird with COVID and the Tokyo Games getting pushed back, but you've now got a date for that and you can refocus. Talk us through that, and what else have you got on in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an odd year, hasn't it, for everyone? And I think that we've just been, lucky to have this goal at the end of it all. And we've been working towards it, the best we can with the restrictions and what are in place. We feel like we're in a really good place. We've just got to work out, we don't know when, for example, we're allowed to fly out to the games just yet. So we've got to work that out and then finalise our exact plan of where we're going to be. But it's going really well, and we're really lucky to, like I said, to have it all. And just in the background, I'm cracking on with my Moth campaign. There's a World Championships, fingers crossed, in Garda in September. So those two things are just sort of bumbling away, and got a nice new boat coming from Mike Cook at Aardvark. We've got new foils, new sail developments with Lennon. Speed never stops. The quest for speed never stops.
Yeah, well, I recorded one of these with Mike Lennon, who's a mutual friend, obviously supports you guys, with some kit, and obviously the Moth sails as well, and I wear his racewear as well. But I was having a bit of chat with him, and he was telling me that Goody had got some sails flown out to Auckland as well. So the heat's really on. So potential rumour mill come back for Goody in there as well. So you're looking forward to that matchup?
Oh, I think it would be incredible. I mean, with the world fits in with the SailGP calendar, and rumours are that Tom Slingsby is moving to Mount Chesney for the summer in Lake Garda with his Moth. So it would be quite an incredible opportunity if we get people like Paul, Nathan, Dubes, Pete, Blair, all these guys. If they all turn up to the World Championships in the Moth, it will be a pretty cool event outside of the in dinghy sailing.
And how do you fancy your chances against them? Because you're a bit on the light side for a Moth. I know you won the UK Nationals and dominated the UK Nationals last year. But do you think you've got the weight to swing it down at a Garda Worlds? Mount Chesney's not too breezy, is it? I guess.
I think it's difficult to know. I mean, ultimately, I'm always fighting physics. But I've just so far, I've always managed to just keep ahead or done quite a good job with the whole package to just about make sure I'm all right in the breeze. Although saying that, Stu, who runs the same setup as me at the Nationals last year, if it was over 12, 14 knots, there was absolutely nothing I could do upwind to hang on to him apart from tack better than him. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. We'll see. You've seen the big speed differences. So we've got a few tricks up our sleeves for this year. So hopefully they will pay off.
Oh, well, interesting. I have to keep my eyes peeled on that point. Well, yeah, thanks for your time today and staying around through all the technical difficulties which the people on YouTube aren't going to have to see. But yeah, no, thanks, and best of luck for 2021. Looking forward to seeing you out in Tokyo. Sadly, no spectators out there, but we'll be keeping a keen eye through the TV on you. And yeah, really interested to see this Moth showdown as well. But fingers crossed, COVID can allow that to happen as well. So yeah, thanks very much for your time, and I'll hit pause on the record there.